July 17, 1951, 4:03 a.m. The sound wasn't human. It was a raw, animal scream of agony tearing through the pre-dawn stillness of 141st Street, a sound that clawed at windows and ripped people from sleep. It came from the mouth of Luther Johnson, Bumpy's baby brother, as he was being dragged behind a speeding Ford pickup truck. His hands were bound with industrial wire, the other end looped around the truck's rear bumper. The four men in the cab were laughing, their heads thrown back in joyless, hysterical mirth, as they took the corner from Lenox Avenue onto 141st, the truck's tires squealing, Luther's body slamming into the curb, bones audibly cracking, his scream rising an octave before being choked off by asphalt and blood. They dragged him for 3 miles. 3 miles of Harlem pavement, past closed bakeries and shadowed doorways, over manhole covers and through piles of trash, a grisly human plow tearing a dark, wet streak through the heart of the neighborhood. They didn't stop until the wire finally snapped at the edge of Marcus Garvey Park, leaving Luther's broken swing sets. The truck kept going, the laughter fading into the distance, leaving behind only the smell of burned rubber, spilled blood, and a silence so heavy it felt like the whole city was holding its breath. By 4:30 a.m., the Whisper network of Harlem was live. A shoeshine boy who couldn't sleep saw the whole thing from his fire escape. A night nurse coming off shift at Harlem Hospital found the body. The call didn't go to the 32nd precinct first. It went to a private line in a back office above the Teresa Hotel. Illinois Gordon picked up, listened for 10 seconds, and his face, a face that had seen everything from the numbers wars to the collapse of Dutch Schultz, went ashen. He didn't speak. He just put the phone down, walked into Bumpy's private study where Bumpy was going over ledger books with a cup of black coffee, and said 2 words. "They got Luther." Bumpy didn't drop his cup. He didn't shout. He set his pen down carefully, aligned it perfectly with the edge of the ledger. He looked up at Illinois, and in that look, Illinois Gordon, a man who'd faced down Tommy guns and police raids, felt a chill crawl up his spine. It wasn't anger. It was something colder, deeper, more absolute. A void where emotion had been, replaced by a calculation so precise it was terrifying. "Alive?" Bumpy asked, his voice flat. Illinois shook his head, just once. Bumpy stood up. He walked to the window, looked out over the waking streets of Harlem, his Harlem. The sun was just hinting at the horizon, painting the skyline in bruised purples and sickly yellows. He stood there for a full 5 minutes, silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Then he turned around. His eyes were dry, his face was a mask of calm. "Get Junie Bird. Get Quick Jackson. Get Willie, Fish, Lewis. Get them here now, and find out who was in that truck. I want names. I want addresses. I want their blood types and what they had for breakfast yesterday. I want to know the names of their mothers. Move." This is the story they don't tell you about. The story the history books smooth over, the legend that got too dark even for the street corners. This is about the morning Bumpy Johnson stopped being a businessman, stopped being a strategist. This is about the morning he became vengeance itself, a force of biblical reckoning, and taught every racist, every 2-bit thug, every enemy looking at Harlem with hungry eyes, a lesson written not in blood, but in annihilation. To understand why they came for Luther, you have to understand Harlem in the summer of 1951. The war was over, the boys were home, but the peace was a fragile, tense thing. Up in Washington Heights, a new breed of predator was nesting. Not the organized Italian mob. Bumpy had an understanding with them, a tense respect carved out in backroom meetings and the occasional show of brutal force. This was something cruder, uglier. A crew of white toughs, mostly Irish and Polish leftovers from street gangs, led by a broken-nosed ex-Marine named Patrick, Packy, O'Rourke. Packy and his boys hadn't earned their spot through cunning or business acumen. They'd muscled their way in through pure, unadulterated violence. They ran cheap protection rackets on the edges of Harlem, preying on the black-owned shops too small for Bumpy's notice or too scared to ask for his help. They'd smash a window, rough up a proprietor, leave a note demanding $50 a week. And they had a signature move, their calling card, the drag. If someone couldn't pay, or talked back, or was just in the wrong place when Packy was in a mean mood, they'd tie a rope around the poor soul's ankles and take them for a ride. It was a message of pure terror, a way to say, "You are nothing but meat we can scrape off the street." They'd done it to a grocer on 145th, a tailor on Amsterdam, a half-dozen others. They always stopped after a block or two, leaving the victim mangled but alive. It was their fun. Packy saw himself as a king of a concrete jungle, and Bumpy Johnson was the lion he needed to slay to prove his worth. He'd been making noise, talking in bars up in the heights about how Harlem was ripe, how the spooks had gotten too comfortable, how it was time for real men to take back the city. Bumpy knew the talk, he'd heard the reports, but Packy was small time, a mosquito buzzing at the edge of his territory. Bumpy was dealing with a potential incursion from the Genovese family downtown, renegotiating police tributes, managing 1,000 moving parts of his empire. He saw Packy as a nuisance, a rat to be dealt with when convenient. He didn't see the rat was rabid, didn't see it was about to scurry right into his house and bite the one person he'd left unguarded. Luther Johnson was Bumpy's opposite in every way. Where Bumpy was sharp angles and cold calculation, Luther was soft edges and warm humor. He wasn't in the life. He worked as a mechanic at a garage on 125th, fixing cars with hands that were always stained with grease and a smile that was always ready. He loved jazz, was saving up to marry his girl Bernice, and believed his big brother, the legendary Bumpy Johnson, walked on water. Bumpy kept Luther insulated, protected, clean. He paid for his apartment, made sure the garage owner knew who Luther's brother was, but never let Luther carry a message, run a number, or even be seen in the same room as a business discussion. Luther was Bumpy's touchstone to a normal world, a living reminder of the man he might have been, the innocence he was fighting to protect in Harlem. And that made him, in the cruel logic of the streets, the perfect target. Packy O'Rourke, drunk on cheap whiskey and his own imagined destiny, hatched his plan not in a shadowy back room, but right on a barstool at McNally's Tavern. Johnson thinks he's untouchable, Packy slurred to his 3 lieutenants, Mick Flanagan, a hulking brute with fists like hams, Jimmy, Rabbits, Callahan, a twitchy, fast-talking wheelman, and Donnie Shea, the meanest of the bunch, who enjoyed hurting things just to see what sound they made. He's got his claws in everything. Cops, politicians, you can't get near him. You don't get near the king, Packy said, a cruel light in his eyes. You poison the well, you kill what he loves. He laid it out. They'd find the brother, the mechanic. They wouldn't kill him clean. They'd do their signature move, but they'd do it bigger, grander, more horrific. They'd drag him through the very heart of Bumpy's kingdom, from one end of Harlem to the other, and leave him where Bumpy would find him. It was a declaration of war written in flesh and asphalt. He'll come for us, Rabbit said, his knee bouncing nervously. Of course he'll come for us. Packy slammed his glass down. That's the point. He'll come raging, blind, stupid. He'll walk right into an ambush up here on our turf. We finish him, and every darky in Harlem falls in line. We take it all. It was a plan born of profound stupidity and bottomless hate. They didn't understand Bumpy Johnson. They thought he was just another gangster, a thug with better suits. They didn't understand the mind that could play chess against the Italian syndicate, the patience that could wait years for the right moment, the love for his community that was the bedrock of his power. They'd poked a sleeping dragon, not with a spear, but by setting its nest on fire. The identification process took Bumpy's network less than 2 hours. By 6 a.m., Junie Bird was back in the office. His usually dapper suit was rumpled, his eyes red. He'd been the one to identify Luther's body at the morgue. It's Packy O'Rourke's crew, Junie said, his voice thick. Witness saw the truck. It's registered to a shell company Rabbits Callahan uses. The shoeshine kid, Leo, he gave descriptions. Packy, Mick, Rabbits, Donnie. All 4 of them, laughing. Bumpy nodded slowly. He was still by the window. The sun was up now, casting long shadows. Where are they? Holed up in Packy's warehouse on 158th and Broadway. Edge of Washington Heights. They've got lookouts. They're expecting you to come. Of course they are, Bumpy said, almost to himself. He turned to the room. Illinois, Junie, Quick Jackson, Willie Fish. His inner circle, men who'd bled for him. They want a war. They want me to bring an army to their doorstep. They want a spectacle. He walked to his desk, sat down, steepled his fingers. So we give them a spectacle. But not the one they're expecting. For the next 6 hours, Bumpy Johnson orchestrated a campaign of silence. He didn't marshal his soldiers. He didn't hand out Tommy guns. He made phone calls. He called a captain in the 33rd Precinct, up in Washington Heights. A conversation about overdue vigors and a sudden, pressing need for the entire night shift to be occupied with a phantom liquor warehouse raid across town at a very specific time. He called a dispatcher at the city sanitation department, arranging for garbage truck routes to be mysteriously rerouted, creating specific traffic patterns. He called 3 different tow truck operators who owed him favors, giving them coordinates and times. This wasn't preparation for a battle, it was the setting of a stage. It was urban choreography. Meanwhile, he sent Illinois and Quick on a different errand. I need a truck, Bumpy told them. Not just any truck, a heavy-duty wrecker, the kind they use to haul semi-trailers. And I need a heavy-gauge chain. The thickest, strongest link chain you can find. 20 feet long. And 4 sets of the strongest handcuffs you can buy. Not police cuffs. Industrial. Illinois didn't ask why, he just nodded. The final call Bumpy made was to his contact inside the Genovese family, a consigliere named Frankie Alley. The conversation was brief and icy. There's a problem north of Harlem. A crew called O'Rourke's. They're about to cease to exist. This is not an incursion into your territory. This is pest control. You will see nothing. You will hear nothing. Any questions? Frankie Alley, a man who'd seen Bumpy's work firsthand, had no questions. The word went out. The heights were off limits tonight. Bumpy's plan was not about stealth. It was about absolute, overwhelming control of the environment. He wasn't going to sneak into Packy's lair. He was going to dismantle it around them, and then he was going to take them for a walk. As dusk fell on July 17th, a strange quiet descended on the border between Harlem and Washington Heights. The usual traffic on Broadway around 158th Street was non-existent. The police cruiser that usually sat at the donut shop was gone. The warehouse where Packy and his men waited was a fortress. They had shotguns by the doors, pistols on their hips, nerves frayed with anticipation and cheap adrenaline. They expected roaring cars, screaming men, the flash of muzzle fire. They expected a war they were sure they could win on their own turf. What they got was silence, deep and unnerving. Then, at exactly 9 p.m., the lights went out. Not just in the warehouse. The entire block went dark. Bumpy had called in his final favor with a lineman at Con Edison. Packy shouted in the sudden blackness, "They're here. Positions." But no attack came, only the deep, diesel rumble of a very large engine approaching. Through the grimy warehouse windows, they saw headlights, huge, blinding halogen lamps mounted on a grill. It was the wrecker, a monstrous Peterbilt, rolling to a stop directly in front of the warehouse's main loading bay doors. Bumpy Johnson stepped out of the passenger side. He was alone. He wore a dark, immaculate suit, a black tie, a fedora pulled low. In his hands, he carried no weapon. Just a large canvas bag. He walked calmly to the reinforced metal door and knocked. 3 firm, deliberate raps. Inside, Packy and his men were confused, terrified. This wasn't a script. He's alone, Mick whispered, peering through a crack. It's a trick, Rabbits hissed, his hands shaking on his shotgun. Packy, trying to regain his bravado, nodded to Donnie. Cover me, I'll talk to him. He unbolted the door, opened it just a crack, his own pistol held behind it. Johnson, you got balls, I'll give you that. Bumpy's face was illuminated by the wrecker's headlights, a mask of serene calm. Patrick O'Rourke, I'm here for you, for Mick Flanagan, for James Callahan, and for Donald Shea. The 4 of you, come out. Packy barked a laugh. You out of your goddamn mind. You walk up here alone and give me orders. I got 12 men in here. You're dead where you stand. Bumpy didn't blink. Look around your block, Patrick. Really look. Packy glanced past Bumpy. The darkness was complete, but now he could make out shapes. Silent men, dozens of them, standing at the periphery of the light. They weren't holding guns up, they were just standing, watching. Bumpy's army wasn't here to attack. They were here to witness, and to ensure no one else interfered. They were a wall of silence. You kill me, Bumpy said softly, and every one of those men becomes a bullet aimed at you and your bloodline for the next 100 years. There will be no hiding. No prison will be deep enough. No witness protection will be secret enough. Your mothers will weep at your graves and then they will disappear. This is not a threat. This is geometry. Now, you can shoot me, and condemn your entire existence to ash. Or you can come out and face what you have earned. Just you 4. Your other boys can walk. This is between us. The genius of it was the choice. Bumpy wasn't denying them agency, he was offering them 2 horrors and letting them pick. The certain, generational nightmare of a war with all of Harlem, or the unknown but personal fate he had planned for them. In that moment, Packy O'Rourke, the would-be king, realized he was not a player in this game. He was a piece on the board, and Bumpy was moving him. His bravado evaporated, replaced by a primal, gut-churning fear. He looked back at his crew. Their faces were pale in the gloom. They'd signed up for a street fight, not this cold, psychological siege. The others walk, Packy croaked. On my word, Bumpy said. Packy made the deal. He ordered his 8 other men to drop their weapons and leave. They filed out, shamed and terrified, melting into the darkness past Bumpy's sentinels. Then it was just Packy, Mick, Rabbits, and Donnie in the warehouse. Bumpy stepped inside, dropping the canvas bag. It clinked heavily. Hands on your heads, kneel. They knelt. They were big men, violent men, but they knelt. Bumpy opened the bag. He pulled out the 4 sets of massive, steel industrial cuffs. One by one, he cuffed their hands behind their backs. The cuffs were inhumanly tight, biting into their wrists. He didn't speak. The only sounds were their ragged breathing and the clank of steel. Then he pulled out the 20-foot length of thick, heavy link chain. He walked behind Mick, the biggest, and padlocked one end of the chain to the back of his cuffs. Then he moved to Rabbits, linked the chain through his cuffs, then Donnie, and finally Packy. All 4 men were now linked together by a single, unbroken chain, like grotesque beads on a string. They were puzzled, scared, but a flicker of hope ignited. Maybe he was just taking them to jail. Maybe this was about arrest, not execution. Bumpy dispelled that notion with his next move. From the bag, he produced 4 thick leather dog muzzles. He muzzled each man, buckling them tight behind their heads. No last words, no screams for the neighbors. Then he turned and walked out of the warehouse. He got into the passenger seat of the wrecker. Illinois Gordon was behind the wheel, his face grim. The huge truck's diesel engine roared to life. Bumpy rolled down his window and looked back at the 4 men, now stumbling to their feet, chained together, muzzled, their eyes wide with dawning, incomprehensible horror. He spoke just one sentence, clear and calm over the engine rumble. You took my brother for a 3-mile ride. Let's see how you like the tour. Illinois put the wrecker in gear. It didn't speed off. It crept forward, just enough to take the slack out of the chain. The 4 men stumbled, then were pulled off their feet. The real journey began. Bumpy didn't take them on a fast, brutal run. That would have been mercy, a quick end. He dictated a route to Illinois. A slow, deliberate route at a steady walking pace. They started in Washington Heights, the men scraping and tumbling over the pavement, their clothes shredding, their skin peeling away. But Bumpy wasn't interested in their turf. He turned the wrecker south, onto Broadway, and crossed the invisible border into Harlem. This was the crucial twist, the psychological masterpiece. He was bringing them home. He dragged them down the full length of Harlem, from 158th Street all the way to 110th, the central artery. And he did it at an hour when Harlem was alive. The jazz clubs were spilling out, the restaurants were closing, families were on stoops trying to catch a breeze. And they saw it. They saw the monstrous wrecker, moving like a funeral hearse. They saw the 4 white men, muzzled and chained, being dragged behind it like slaughtered animals. At first, there was shock. Silence. Then, a murmur. Then, recognition. The word spread like a brushfire ahead of the truck. That's Packy O'Rourke's crew. They killed Luther Johnson. Bumpy's got them. And the mood changed. It wasn't horror that filled the streets. It was a profound, solemn, grim understanding. This was justice. Not courtroom justice. Not police justice. Street justice. The ancient, eye for an eye justice that their ancestors would have recognized. People didn't turn away. They watched. They lined the sidewalks in silence. Old men nodded slowly. Mothers held their children's faces to their skirts, not to shield them, but because this was a lesson that needed to be seen, a story that needed to be remembered. The wreckage of the 4 men got worse with every block. The chain didn't break. The cuffs didn't give. The muzzles stifled their screams into wet, choked grunts. They became less and less human, more and more just raw, bleeding matter being erased against the city they had tried to terrorize. Bumpy sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, never looking back. He didn't need to. He could hear it. He could feel the vibration of their destruction through the very frame of the truck. He was the conductor of this symphony of vengeance, and every shriek of metal on asphalt, every thud of a body hitting a curb, was a note in the song for his brother. They dragged them past the Teresa Hotel, past the Cotton Club, past the garage where Luther had worked. The streak they left on the pavement this time was not just one man's blood, it was a composite of 4, a dark, viscous line painting a new boundary for Harlem. A boundary that said, this is what happens here. By the time they reached the midpoint, Around 135th Street, two of them, Rabbits and Donnie, had long since stopped moving. They were just dead weight, adding to the grotesque smear. Packy and Mick, the toughest, still twitched, still suffered. Bumpy didn't stop. The tour continued, all the way down to 110th Street, the southern edge, then he had Illinois turn around and go back up Lenox Avenue. A second pass, a reinforcement of the lesson. By the time the wrecker finally, mercifully, came to a stop back near Marcus Garvey Park, near where Luther had been found, there was nothing left to untether. The chain was attached to four pulverized, indistinguishable masses of flesh, bone, and fabric. The street for blocks was a testament to the journey. Bumpy got out of the truck. The street was crowded now, but utterly silent. 1,000 eyes watched him. He walked to the back of the wrecker, looked down at what remained of the men who killed his brother. He turned to face his people. His voice, when it came, was hoarse but carried in the stillness. Harlem is not a playground for animals, he said. It is not a resource to be plundered. It is our home. You touch my family, you touch this family, and Harlem itself will rise up and grind you into the dust you came from. Let this be understood. From this river to that river, from this park to that park. This is ours. We protect our own. He didn't say another word. He nodded to Illinois, who used bolt cutters to sever the chain from the truck's hitch. Then Bumpy got back in the truck, and they drove away, leaving the remains and the chain in the street as a monument. He didn't call the cleanup crew. He let the city do it. Let the white newspapers scratch their heads about a bizarre gangland incident. Let the police, who'd been so conveniently absent, file a report about an accident with unidentified vagrants. Everyone in Harlem knew the truth. The story of the chain of four became the foundational myth of Bumpy's later years. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about re-establishing a fundamental law. After that night, the protection rackets on the edges evaporated. Racist crews from other boroughs gave Harlem a wide berth. The police, already on the take, understood the new level of consequence. Bumpy had demonstrated that his retribution was not just lethal, it was transformative, theatrical, and absolute. It entered the realm of legend. Years later, old-timers would point to a faint, dark stain on the asphalt near a certain corner and say, "That's from the chain." That's where Bumpy Johnson reminded the world who we are. Luther Johnson was buried 3 days later. Bumpy paid for everything, the biggest funeral Harlem had ever seen. He never spoke of it again. But those who knew him said something in him had closed off that day, a final door to mercy had been shut and welded. He became more ruthless in business, more unyielding in his deals, but also more fiercely protective of Harlem's weak. He had drawn a line in the blood of his enemies, and he spent the rest of his life making sure no one ever thought to cross it again. The genius of Bumpy's revenge wasn't in the brutality, though that was immense. It was in the presentation. He didn't hide his vengeance in the dark. He staged it in the open, on the main streets, for the very people the crime was meant to terrorize. He turned an act of hate into a community ritual of justice. He didn't just kill Packy O'Rourke and his crew, he erased them in the most humiliating, public way possible, using their own signature move against them 1,000-fold. He proved that in Harlem, the predator could become the prey, and the street itself would bear witness and remember. So when you hear the name Bumpy Johnson, and you hear about the king, the chess master, the Robin Hood of Harlem, remember the morning of July 17, 1951. Remember that when pushed to the absolute edge, when the sanctity of his blood and his home was violated, Bumpy Johnson didn't just settle the score. He rewrote the rules of engagement in permanent, steel link ink. He taught a lesson so severe, so complete, that its echo still whispers on those streets today: cross the line, and Harlem will drag you to your end, and won't bother to look back. If this story of raw justice and the unbreakable bonds of brotherhood hit you in the chest, if you understand that sometimes the world doesn't give you justice so you have to become it, then you need to be part of this channel. We are the keepers of these legends, the ones who refuse to let the truth of what really happened in these streets be whitewashed or forgotten. Hit that subscribe button right now. Tap that bell, because we are just getting started. We have more untold stories of Bumpy Johnson, of the kings and queens of Harlem who built a world when the world was trying to break them. Stories of strategy, of loyalty, of revenge that reshaped cities. You don't want to miss what's coming next. And in the comments, let me know, what other legends do you want to hear? Who else operated with that same deadly precision and code? The conversation starts with you. Remember, Harlem remembers, and now, you do too.